David, welcome to Talk Python to me. Awesome to have you here.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see what the AIs have to say today.
The AIs, yeah, language models, sure.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Now, you've built a really cool extension for Jupyter that plugs in large language models for people, and it's looking super interesting. So I'm excited to talk to you about it.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about Jupyter AI too. I've actually
Mm.
presented this twice at once at actually three times. I did a short demo at like this like tech meetup thing in Seattle. That was actually the
Hmm.
first time Jupyter AI was shown to the public. And then I presented at PyData Seattle at Microsoft's Redmond campus.
Hmm.
And then I got to present again at JupyterCon in Paris this May. It was a really wonderful experience. But yeah,
Wow. Yeah,
I
you're
love
making the
to,
rounds.
I love to talk about Jupyter AI. It happens to get me some plane tickets. Just joking.
I honestly, that's like half the bonus of conferences is like awesome places you get to go, and the other half probably is the people you meet. It's really cool.
Oh, for me, it's like almost like all the people. Like the people are
Yeah.
just so great, especially JupyterCon.
Hmm. Yeah,
Hmm.
and the JupyterCon videos are now out for JupyterCon 2023, and there's a ton of good looking talks there. So,
Yeah,
um,
lots of really smart people. I mean, like I was chatting to a few folks there, and that's like the only place where you're gonna find like people who work at these hedge funds and trading firms just lounging so idly and casually, right? Like, yeah,
the
it's
market's opening and they're chilling. It's all fine.
yeah, there's a lot of smart people there. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, I think Jupyter more than a lot of programming technologies bring people from all sorts of different places together, different backgrounds. Uh,
Yeah,
yeah,
there's
yeah.
like a huge story. Yeah, there's like a lot of reasons behind that. But long story short, Jupiter's pretty awesome, and that's kind of why I work to contribute to
Yeah,
it.
awesome. Well, let's start this whole conversation with a bit of background about yourself. For people who didn't see your talk and don't know you yet, tell them a bit
Yeah,
about you.
I mean, I didn't really give much of an intro there either, but sure. I yeah, so I work for AWS as a software engineer, and I've been with AWS specifically the AI ML organization at AWS. I've been with them for almost 2 years now, and right now I my manager is actually Brian Granger, who's the
Oh
co-founder of
yeah.
Project Jupyter. He also works for AWS. Yeah. So he's been offering some technical and product guidance for the things that we're building, and he's a fantastic gentleman to work with.
Cool.
And
That's a really neat to have him available as a resource, as a colleague.
yeah, it's funny. Like I actually, yeah, I met him internally. So when I first joined, I wasn't working for him, but at tech companies, you can do this internal transfer thing. And basically, my old team was kind of the team I just joined. Right after I joined, it sort of started to dissolve a little because they just launched a product at reInvent, which happens in like December. And then, so I joined in December, and it's like, oh, hi. So then and then I messaged, just saw Brian Granger's name somehow, and I messaged him, and I didn't even know that he was the co-founder of Project Jupyter. I just wanted to work for him because I used it before, and yeah, it's a pretty funny story.
Yeah, indeed. I
Hmm.
imagine that project has really, this is Jupyter AI is a great example, but I just thinking of being, say, a founder of Jupyter or something like that. These things take on a life of their own, and he's probably in awe of all the stuff
Oh
happening and all the
yeah,
things going on, and there's probably a lot of stuff in
it's
Jupyter he doesn't
huge.
even know about, right? It's like that's happening.
Yeah, it's huge. And
Yeah.
yeah, and like the leadership structure has changed to accommodate that. So
Hmm.
Brian is no longer the benevolent dictator for life. Project Jupiter is now governed by a committee and decentralized and democratized to just
Yeah.
to allow it to scale. Hmm.
Yeah, of course. Of course. So let's start by talking about a bit of the role of AI in data science. So
Hmm.
I don't know how you feel about it. Obviously, you must be somewhat of an advocate putting this much time and energy into bringing it to Jupiter.
Wow.
However, I personally, when if I want to know something, I don't think there's a great specific search result for it. Straight to ChatGPT or friends. I think
Hmm.
there's such a wealth of information there. From I need to take this paragraph and clean it up and make it sound better, to I have this program I want to convert to another language, or I have this data in this website. How do I get it?
Hmm.
Like, just you can ask so many open-ended questions and really get great answers. So it seems to me, especially coming from, like I mentioned before, those diverse backgrounds,
Hmm.
people not necessarily being like super deep in programming, maybe they're deep in finance, but they do programming, that having
Right.
this AI capability to ask, like, hey, I know I can, but how? What do you
Right.
think for data science in particular?
Yeah, I mean, so this is an interesting topic, right? Because I think the whole power of language models stems from their ubiquity and versatility and how they can sort of be, they're very generally applicable, right? So,
Hmm.
like, the thing about language models is that they're basically statistical models that have been trained on a very, very, very large corpus of data. And that's really, to the computer doesn't really understand English. It doesn't really understand natural language. It's basically making it has like when it's trained, it has like knowledge of the distribution of information and how information sort of interacts with other information. So like because of that, it has a very general applicability, right? And I don't think that its utility is limited in data science. Now, if we're talking about the field of data science specifically, I think language models have extraordinary utility and explanatory natural language tasks, which I think everybody is aware of now, now that ChatGPT has been out for almost a year.
Yeah.
But I think in the field of data science and other like deep technical fields, they're especially applicable because of how complicated some of the work is, right? So
Yeah.
like yeah. And yeah, Chat AI can also help analyze and debug code, which Jupyter Lab also allows you to do. So,
Yeah. I know it's statistics, but
mhm,
when you look at it, it seems like it understands, right? It seems like it understands my question. And I think one of the really interesting parts is the fact that these LLMs have a context, right? I
mhm,
would like you to write a program in Python. Okay, great.
mhm,
Tell it to me. I want a program that does X, Y, Z, and then it writes it in Python, which sounds so simple. But up until then, things like
mhm.
Siri and all the other voice assistants, they seemed so disjointed and so not understand. You're like, I just asked you about the weather. And when I ask you how hot
Right.
it is, like, how do you not understand that that applies to the weather, right? There's just, and the fact that you converse with them over a series of interactions is pretty special.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the context, yeah, is basically implemented just by passing the whole history
Yeah.
appended to your prompt. So yeah, it's not like any super stateful magic or whatever, but it's still very interesting, like how far you can take it. And yeah, definitely like the context it allows you to interact with the AI a lot more conversationally and humanly. Like you don't have to pretend like you're talking to an AI. You can actually just kind of treat it like a human, and it still answers questions very well. So
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah. It was even at Google, there was that engineer who said they thought it had become sentient. And then there was that whole drama around that, right?
You, this is such a crazy coincidence, but my roommate is actually friends with that gentleman.
Oh, really?
I
Okay.
know,
Wow.
absolutely crazy coincidence. Like, it's just fun. I just thought it was really funny you bringing it up. It was a Cajun gentleman, senior engineer at Google,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very
It's been a little
funny.
while. I
Like,
don't remember all the details, but yeah, I mean, it's pretty
yeah.
wild and pretty powerful. I think I've recently read, I've tried to quick look it up, but I didn't find it. I think they just used LLMs to discover like a new protein folding. And it's that kind of stuff that makes me think like, okay,
Yeah,
how interesting that it's that knowledge wasn't out there in the world
yeah. So I
necessarily.
mean, yeah. So I have a lot to say on that subject. So
Okay.
personally, I don't believe that language models are actually intelligent. I think that people are conflating well, they're certainly not conscious, right? But
Absolutely. Yeah. I
as to
agree.
whether they're intelligent, I don't think they are. I think that intelligence has a like intelligence as we know it, as humans know it, has some different characteristics that language models don't really exhibit. They're best thought of as like really, really, really good statistical models. Like, are you familiar with the mirror test?
I
That's
don't think maybe, but I don't think so.
yeah, so it's like this idea in animal psychology, but like if a cat sees a mirror, it thinks it's another cat because
Right.
it
You
doesn't
see them all
recognize
get
its own
like big and
inflection.
like trying to like act big and tough to chase it off, and it's just them. Yeah.
Yeah, and language models are kind of like that for humans, right? Like if something mimics human-like qualia closely enough, it's
Mhm.
very tempting to think of it as human, but
Yeah. We
it's
see
not.
faces on Mars when it's really just erosion,
Yeah,
stuff like that.
exactly. I could talk about
So,
this like for a full hour, but yeah, we should totally move on to another topic before I
well,
go
when
on
you're
a
saying it's
tirade.
not that intelligent, I'm wondering if maybe you've misnamed this project. Maybe it should just be Jupiter A, like the I. Do you got to drop the I? I don't know.
I mean, I we're just following convention, right? So I
Oh,
still use the
I'm just
term
teasing.
AI.
Of course, of course. You got to talk to
It's
people.
just, yeah.
Well, emphasize the artificial, huh? Yeah.
Yeah.
So before we get to Jupyter AI, like what came before it? How did people work with things like ChatGPT and other LLMs in Jupyter before stuff like Jupyter AI came along?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think initially it was a combination. So the initial motivation for this project came through a combination of sort of a demo put together by Fernando Perez, who is another, I believe,
I think
the
he's one of the
another
co-founders. Yeah.
co-founder of
Hmm.
Project Jupyter, and he put together this demo called Jupyter, which is it's like spelled like Jupiter, except the last letter is an E, and it's a pun of like Chat GPT, right?
Uh huh.
Jupyter. So it was a combination of that input, that demo project set by Fernando, and some motivation from my manager Brian, who also was, as a leader in the AWS AI organization. He's always trying to think of fancy schmancy new ideas, right? And this is a pretty fun idea to work out. And so I put together, I think this was sometime in early January, I put together the first demo. It was private, and I showed it off to the team, and they were like, wow, this has a lot of potential. Let's see if we can grow it a bit more. And
Hmm.
then as we worked on it for the next few months, it became clear like, oh, wow, this is actually really significant. Let's keep working on this. So yeah, like it's definitely been a collaborative effort to bring Jupyter AI to where it is today.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Sounds like it. Definitely a lot of contributors over on the GitHub listing. So
Yeah,
let's get into it. What is Jupyter AI? I mean, people can guess, but it's
yeah,
also different in ways than maybe just plugging in a chat window.
yeah. So Jupyter AI is actually right now it's two packages, but it's best thought of as just a set of packages that bring generative AI to Project Jupyter as a whole. So not just Jupyter Lab, but also Jupyter Notebook and IPython, right? And yeah.
Even the shell. How do you? I guess you invoke it by doing like the
Oh,
magic there as well.
well, it's the IPython shell, which is not the same as like a bash or
Got it.
bash
Got it.
shell,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
instance, in your
Yeah. Of
terminal.
course. Yeah.
Right. Hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I can dive into a little bit more detail
Yeah.
on what
Yeah.
these two packages are. So we have the base Jupyter AI package, which is spelled exactly as you might imagine it. It's Jupyter-AI. That is a Jupyter Lab extension that brings a UI to Jupyter Lab, which is the screenshot that you're showing on your screen. But for viewers without a screen, it basically is the package that adds that chat panel to the left-hand side and allows you to speak conversationally with an AI. And then
Hmm.
the second package is Jupyter AI Magics, which is spelled the same, except at the end it's spelled hyphen magics. And that is actually the base library that implements some of the AI providers we use and brings these things called magic commands to the IPython shell. And magic commands basically let you invoke uh, the our library code, aka like using it to like call language models, for instance, right? And that allows you to do it inside an IPython context. So what's crazy is that if you run IPython in your terminal shell, you can actually run Jupyter AI from your terminal, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. I mean, it makes sense, of course, but I hadn't
Yeah,
really
it's
thought about it. Yeah, I thought more
we
of this
make
like kind of a GUI UI type of thing that was alongside what you were doing. Yeah.
yeah, we try to make it flexible, and there's reasons for the magic commands, which I can talk about that later though.
Yeah. Sure. Now,
Mhm.
one thing, I mean, you said this, but I want to emphasize it a little bit in that
Yeah.
um, this will run anywhere IPython kernel runs, which is Jupyter Lab Notebook, but also Google Colab, VS Code, other places as well, right? So
hmm
pretty much it comes to you wherever your Jupyter type of stuff is, right?
Yeah, and the same goes for the lab extension. So the great thing about lab extensions is that they work anywhere where the product is just sort of built on top of Jupyter Lab, right? So Google
Hmm.
Colab is essentially what Google has is well, I obviously can't attest to what they're actually doing, but most likely it's like a set of extensions or CSS themes that are built on top of Jupyter Lab, but like the underlying code is still Jupyter Lab. It's still mostly Jupyter Lab. So
Right.
you can actually just install extensions and they work just fine, which is another reason why Jupyter Lab is just pretty awesome.
Yeah, it sure is. Yeah,
hmm
Jupyter Lab itself is basically a pre-selected, pre-configured set of extensions, right? That's pretty
Yes,
cool.
yes, that is true. Yes.
Yeah.
hmm
So I've been, I don't know, giving preference to or my showing just what I play with mostly, which is ChatGPT. But there's actually a lot of language models that you can work with, right?
Oh, yes, yes. So one of the big things, and this is something I'll circle back to later, is that Jupyter AI is meant to be model agnostic, meaning that we don't discriminate against the choice of model or model provider. Because as an open source project, it's very imperative that we maintain the trust of our users, right? Like users have to be sure that this isn't just some product that exists to force or pigeonhole them into using a certain model provider like
Yeah.
OpenAI or Anthropic, right? Like it's the product makes no opinions. We simply try to support everything as best as we can. And we've written a lot of code to make sure that all of these models and just play nicely together essentially. Like every model provider, like let's say from Anthropic or AI 21 or Cohere, every one of these APIs kind of has its own quirks. Every one of its
Yeah.
Python SDKs has its own quirks. And we work very hard to basically iron out the surface and make everything have the same interface. And yeah, I think we can talk about that later though.
Sure. And it also makes it pretty easy to try them out, right? If you just
Oh,
switch
yeah.
from one to the other, you're like, I wonder how Hugging Face versus OpenAI would
Yes.
do to solve this problem, right?
Absolutely, right? Like that's kind of one the idea is like while, certain model providers, they might offer a UI if they're very well funded by their investors, right? So like for example, OpenAI, they have a UI, but that UI only allows you to compare between different models from OpenAI, which, like as an independent third party looking to use an AI service, like that information is obviously a little biased, right? Like you want to see like what other providers have to offer. Like what does AI 21 have? What does Anthropic
Hmm.
have? And right now, there really is no like cross model provider like UI or like interface in general. What like Yeah, and that's where that's kind of one of the use cases that Jupyter AI was intended to fit. Um, yeah.
Yeah, provides a standard way to interact with all these and sort of compare them. And it's also a UI for them if you're using Jupyter Lab. Yeah.
Hmm.
Hmm. What about, so I'm not familiar with all of these different models and companies. Do any of those run locally, like things like GPT for all, where it's like
Hmm.
a local model versus some kind of cloud? Where's your key? Where's your billing details and all that?
Yeah, so we definitely we actually recently just merged a PR that adds GPT for all support, and
Okay.
that's included in the release. However, I think back when we first implemented this a few months ago, I had a few issues with platform compatibility. So like it wouldn't so like some of the binaries that we downloaded from GP for all didn't seem to work well on my M1 Mac, for instance.
Mm.
So I'd say yes, we do have local model support, but it's a bit experimental right now. We're still like ironing out the edges and testing, like seeing how we can make the experience better. Like, does it sometimes only give bad output because we forgot to install the shared library? Like, those are the
Yeah,
type of questions that our team is
I
wrangling with
see.
right now.
I see. Yeah, maybe I
Mhm.
just jumped right into it, but maybe tell people what GPT for all is just real quickly.
Yeah, I mean, GP4All offers a few local models. Actually, they offer several, I believe,
Yeah,
not just a
I think they
few.
offer maybe like 10 to 15. It's the
Yeah.
numbers getting quite large. Yeah.
Yeah,
To the
I'll
point
be
where I
on.
don't know what the right choice is. I'm like, which one do I
Yeah.
download? They say they're all good. Of course, they're going to say they're good.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll be frank, I don't actually have that much experience with GPT4All. It's
Sure.
we mainly use them as sort of a provider for like these
Right.
free and open source language models.
Yeah.
But yeah, beyond that, it's yeah, like I think they offer a UI as well for multiple
They do. Yeah.
platforms.
Basically, I've only played with them a little bit, just started checking it out, but it's basically a local, you download the
Hmm.
model, you run it locally, you don't pay anything
Yeah.
because it's just running on your machine, right? As opposed to say OpenAI and others where you've at least got rate limiting and a certain
Hmm.
amount of queries before you have to pay, and maybe potentially access to better models like Chat GPT-4 versus 3.5 and so on.
Well, I think like that's also taking like the characteristics of these like service providers for granted, right? So like like yes, definitely while it does hurt the wallet to pay for like usage credits, right? Like it's also pretty remarkable how like small the latency has gotten with some of these
Hmm.
APIs. Like I've gotten like sub 500 millisecond latency on some of these APIs, and that's really incredible because when I was using GPT for all, the latency was a little bit high, right? When running
Yeah,
locally with limited compute resources. It's really remarkable like how fast some of these APIs are.
it's it is pretty insane.
Hmm.
Sometimes it drives me crazy. I'm just only again referring to ChatGPT because I don't have the experience with the others to the degree, but it drives me
Hmm.
crazy how it artificially limits the response based on the
Mm.
speed of the response so it looks like it's chatting with you. I'm like, no, I have 4 pages of stuff because you just get it out. It'll say it'll say something like, if you can
Hmm.
ask, "Oh, I gave you a 5 page program. Let's call it
Hmm.
X. If you say what is X, it'll just start printing it slowly, line by line. Like you just are echoing it back. Just get it out. I want to ask you the next question. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like it's like in that case, that's actually a feature request that we've gotten because it doesn't actually slow down. Like it's not just like a pointless animation. The
Yeah,
language, yeah, the servers are streaming the essentially token by token, right?
yeah,
As the language model generates output. So it's kind of more like a progress indicator than
yeah,
a superfluous animation. Yeah.
yeah. Of course.
Hmm.
But if you've got something large blocks of text you're working with, it can be it can be a drag. All
Hmm.
right, I wanted to kind of touch on um, some of the different features that I pulled out that I thought were cool. I mean,
Hmm.
obviously, it goes without saying that Jupyter AI is on GitHub. I mean, because it's
Yeah.
software and it's open source, which I don't know if we said that, but obviously free open source on
Mm-hmm.
GitHub, BSD3 license.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also noteworthy that it's officially under the Jupyter Lab organization, not
Yes.
under the David or David account. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yep. It's officially part of the Jupyter Lab subproject, and yep, as you pointed out, we're under the Jupyter Lab GitHub org as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about some of the different things you can do with it. Some of them will be straightforward, like just like how do I write a function, Jupyter AI, and others I think are going to be a little more interesting. So let's start with asking something about your notebook. Tell us what people can do here.
Ooh, yeah. So asking about your notebook basically means like you can actually teach Jupyter AI about certain files, right? So the way
Hmm.
you do this is via a slash command in the chat UI. So you type slash learn and then file path, and you it essentially teaches the Jupyter AI about that file. Now that it works best with files that are written in natural language, right? So like
Yeah.
text files or markup or markdown rather. um, yeah, so like those kind, like especially like developer documentation as well, right? It works really well with those. It works best with those kind of files. And after Jupyter AI learns about these files, you can then ask questions about the files it's learned by prefixing your question with the slash ask slash command, which is yeah,
That is so cool.
it's pretty cool. It is pretty cool. I know.
It's so cool because what what I've done a lot of times if I want Chat GPT to help me, it's like I'm like, all right, well, let me copy some code.
Right.
And then I'm going to have a conversation about it. But a lot
Right.
of the context of, well, it's actually referencing this other function and what does that do? Or just a broader understanding of what am I actually working on is
Hmm.
missing, right? Because I've only copied it. You can't paste, 20 files into ChatGPT and start talking about it. But with this, you can, right? You can say, learn about learn about different things, right? So you can say learn
Right.
about your notebook, but you can also probably tell it like learn about my documentation or learn
Yes.
about my data set. And now let me talk to you
Yes.
about it, right?
Yeah. So what's interesting is that the right now, while it works best for natural language documents, we are working on improving the experience for code. So from
Hmm.
our testing, like the code is mostly like the capabilities of Jupyter AI after learning code is right now mostly limited to explaining what code does, but but it sort of like explains it from the doc stream. So we're working on a way to format the code in a manner that is more interpretable to a language model. It's
Sure.
more, yeah, and we're working on ways to improve the experience for code. But yeah, definitely. The long-term vision is to have Jupyter AI literally be able to learn from a whole directory of files or
Yeah.
possibly even a URL, right? Like a remote URL to like like a documentation page
Sure.
or yeah, like
Yeah.
we have some big ideas there. We're still working on them. It's
I want to
yeah.
work with a new package XYZ. Like I don't know what
Yes.
XYZ is. You know what? Here's where you can learn about it. Go and figure it
Right.
out. Yeah.
Right. Like query the PyPI API, get the docs page from the
Yeah.
metadata and then go to that URL, scrape it. Like
Yeah.
yeah,
Exactly.
lots of things we're exploring and I've been
It's
trying
still
to
kind of early days for this, right? You've been at it about a year or so.
yeah, it's been out for a while. Recently, I've had to work on a few other things as well, like Jupyter AI. Unfortunately, I cannot give my entire life to Jupyter AI, so I've been working on a few other things these past few months. But yes, there are a lot of things that I envision for Jupyter AI. I have a much bigger vision for what I want this project to
Okay,
be and what it
exciting,
can be capable of. Yeah.
exciting.
Hmm.
So, what are this screenshot that you got here in the section that I'll link to in the show notes is cool because
Hmm.
you can select a piece of a portion, not even a whole cell, but a portion of
Right.
code in a cell, and then you can ask, "What does this code do?" Right?
Yep.
That's
So
awesome.
we have an integration with the Jupyter Lab editor APIs. So you can select a block of code and then include that in your prompt, and it will be appended to your prompt below, right?
Right.
So you could, or it's appended above, sorry. And you can basically ask like, so you can select a block of code. So in this screenshot right here, there's this block of code that computes the least common multiple of two integers, right? And you can select that and then click include selection and then ask Jupyter AI, what does this do? Which is pretty awesome.
Yeah. Another checkbox is replace selection. I'm guessing that is like, help me rewrite this code to be more
Yes.
efficient, or if there's any bugs, fix it.
So the replace selection checkbox is totally independent. So you can actually use both at the same time. And one of the use cases for this is refactoring. And I've actually
Hmm.
applied this in practice a few times where you can basically select a block of code and then click both include and replace selection. And then you can format your prompt to say, refactor this block of code, do not include any additional helper text. And when you send that prompt over, it will actually refactor the code for you in your notebook, which is,
Okay.
yeah, like is pretty great.
That's pretty awesome. You could do
Mhm.
things like refactor this to use guarding clauses so it's less nested and
Or
less arrow code or whatever, right?
yeah, or like add a doc string, right? Summarize the purpose of this function, and then enclose that in a doc string and add it to the function, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Right. Or this code is pandas code, but I'd like to use polars. Please rewrite it for polars, which is
Yes.
not a super compatible API. It's not like Dask to pandas, where it's basically the same.
Yeah, and this kind of circles back to that question you had asked earlier. I think I went on a tangent there and didn't fully answer, but like, what is like the utility of Jupyter AI to like
Mm.
data practitioners, right? So we're
Yeah. Yeah.
talking data scientists, machine learning engineers. Like this, the include selection features, we've heard great feedback about how helpful it is to like actually explain a data set. So sometimes like
Yeah.
you're working with a test set and it's not immediately clear what the features of this test set are or like what this even does because sometimes it's like high dimensional data and they can literally select it and then click include selection and say and tell Jupyter AI, explain to me what this does. Just like what is this like data frame
Yeah.
stuff? Like, whoa, we got data frames in data frames. Like, what's going on here? Like, what even is the structure of this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And I think it's super valuable. I think and this is like a little bit I was getting to before, one of the features that I think is cool. Whereas if you just go with straight chat GPT, you copy your code, you paste it into the chat. Hopefully it doesn't say it's too much text, and then you can talk about it. But then when you get
Mhm.
an answer, you've got to grab it, move it back over. And this fluid back and forth is really nice.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the design principles that we worked out when first starting this project officially, is the idea that Jupyter AI should be human-centered, as in
Hmm.
you shouldn't be expected to be a developer to know how to use this tool. Like this
Yeah.
tool is for humans, not for any specific persona, just for
Yeah.
humans in general. Hmm.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Yeah. So in this case, you select the function that does the lowest common denominator bit and you ask it what it does. It says the code will print out the least common multiple of two numbers passed to it. Super simple, very
Hmm.
concise. Okay, great. Now we can go on to the next thing, right?
Yeah.
That's awesome. And then there's this LCD function that we're kind of talking about here. This example is recursive, which
Hmm.
I think recursion is pretty insane,
Yeah.
right? As just a concept for people to get
Oh
their
wait,
head
no,
around.
this is the iterative version. So this is
Oh,
after they, yeah,
oh,
this
this is
is the
after. Yeah.
iterative.
So if we go
Yeah,
back
yeah,
up,
yeah.
right? It's no, maybe not.
Oh,
Anyway, so like one of the things you ask it is things like an example is rewrite this function to be iterative, not recursive, right? Which is actually really
right.
really awesome, right? You're like,
Hmm.
this is breaking
Yeah.
my brain. Let's let's see if we can not do that anymore. Another thing I wanted to talk about, and you talked a fair amount about this in
Hmm.
your presentations that you did. I can't remember if it was the JupyterCon or the PyData one that I saw, but
Yeah.
one of those two. You talked about generating new notebooks and how it's actually quite a tricky process. You got to break it down into little steps because if you ask too much from the AI, it kind of doesn't give you a lot of great answers.
Hmm.
Tell us about making new notebooks. Like, why would I even use? Like, I can go to Jupyter Lab and say file new, and it'll make that
Yeah,
for me, right? So, what's this about?
yeah, so the generate capability is great because it generates a file that is essentially a tutorial that can be used as a tutorial to teach you about new subjects, right? So like you could, for example, submit a prompt like slash generate a notebook about async IO or a demonstration of how to use matplotlib, right? And after, so this will take a bit of time, but eventually Jupyter AI is done thinking and generates a file. And it names the file and it generates a notebook, and the notebook has a name, it has a title, it has like sections, table of contents, and each of the cells within it like is tied to some like topic that is determined to be helpful and to answer the user's question, right?
Awesome. Could
So,
I do something like I have weather data in this format from the
mhm.
U.S. Weather Service, and could you generate me a notebook to plot this XYZ and help me answer these questions? Or like, could I ask it something like that?
Not at the moment. So like that would best be done. That would be done best if since the data is already like I'm assuming that the data is already available, right, in
Yeah,
some
yeah,
kind of like format, right? So like in a notebook, you could use a UI to like select that entire select that selection and then tell Jupyter AI to generate code to plot that data set.
sure.
Um, so right now, generate only takes a natural language prompt as its only
I
argument.
see.
So it's kind of
Yeah.
like stateless in that regard. Yeah.
So in this case, you can say slash generate a demonstration on of how to use matplotlib, and then the
Hmm.
response is great. I'll start working on your notebook. It'll take a few minutes, but I'll reply when it's ready. In the meantime, let's keep talking. So, what happens behind the scenes that takes a few minutes here?
Oh yeah, so this is a bit interesting. It does kind of dive deep into like the technical details, which I'm not sure if which do you want to just like
Yeah,
dive?
let's do it. Yeah, let's go. Tell us how it works.
Yeah,
Probably
so slash
good chance to
generate.
explore that. Yeah.
Yeah, so slash generate, the first thing is that the prompt is first expanded into essentially a table of contents, right? So basically we tell the language model, generate us a, table of contents conforming to this JSON schema. And when you pass a JSON schema included in your prompt, the language model will be much more, will have a much higher likelihood of returning exclusively a JSON object that matches that JSON schema that you had initially provided. So in our case, we generate a table of contents, and then we take that table of contents, and then we say for each section, right, and we do this in parallel, right, like generate us some code cells that are appropriate for teaching this section of the document, right? So for
Mhm.
example, for matplotlib, right, like maybe the first section is your first like generating your first plot, plotting 3D functions, and the next one is like plotting complex functions with phase or something like that, right? And then with each of these sections, we then send a another prompt template to the language model for each of these sections, asking it to generate the
Right.
code. And then at the end, we join it all together, and then we save it to disk, and then emit that message and say we're done. So
Okay.
yeah,
So maybe the English literature equivalent would be instead of just saying write me a story about a person who goes on an adventure and gets lost, it's like I want give me an outline, bullet points of interesting things that would make up a story of how somebody goes on an adventure and gets
right.
lost. And then
Give
for
us
each one of
the
yeah,
yeah.
and then for each one of those, you're like, now tell this part of the story. Now tell this part, and somehow that makes it more focused and accurate, right?
Well, the main limitation is that because we're model agnostic, language models are limited in how much output they can generate,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So, like the issue we were running into when we were trying to do the whole thing all at once, like generate me the whole notebook, is that some language models just couldn't do it, right? And in an effort to, sort of stay model agnostic, we deliberately broke this process down into like smaller subtasks each with
Hmm.
its own like prompt template in order to accommodate these models that may lack the same token size windows that other models have.
Yeah,
Hmm.
interesting. Yeah, I think just even for ones that have large token spaces, I think they still, the more specific you can be, the more likely you're going to get a focused result instead of a wandering, vague result. You know,
Mm,
teach me about math or teach me how to factor, how to integrate this differential or solve this series of differential equations for
right.
physics. Like you're going to get a really different answer to those two questions,
Yeah. And yeah,
right?
and that's also yeah, that's also circles back to like a topic I did want to call out, but I don't think we hit on it, is that the chat UI actually does support rendering in both Markdown and LaTeX, which is a markup language for math.
Hmm.
So you can ask it both complex engineering and mathematical questions, like asking it to
Oh,
explain you like, yeah, so like there might be a demo here. I'm not sure if it's on this page though, but like,
so if I had like a Fourier fast Fourier transform in LaTeX, and I put it
mhm.
in there and say, "What is this?" It'll say it's a fast Fourier transform or something like that.
Yes, yes, and
It's
it also
nuts.
works the other way around, right? So you can also use it to say like, hey, explain to me what the 2D Laplace equation is, or
Yeah,
explain to me like what does this do, right?
yeah.
And it will actually generate and format the equation inside the chat UI, which is really remarkable. I love that feature.
That is actually really awesome, and it's also really appropriate for a scientific oriented thing like Jupiter, right?
Yeah, and the remarkable thing is that because ChatGPT and like other such language models, like the ones from Anthropic and AI 21, because like they are founded on the premise of where like their functionality comes from having such a large corpus of data, they know a remarkable amount of information. So like we've tried like some example notebooks of quantum computing and explained those really well. I tried one with like the Black-Scholes options pricing model used in financial engineering. Like it's really remarkable, like the utility that it offers just by being there in the side panel. Like you essentially have like math. You essentially have like a math wizard available to you in Jupyter Lab at all
it's,
times.
it's probably better than a lot of math professors in terms of not necessarily in the depth of one area, but if you ask somebody who does like abstract algebra
Yeah.
about real analysis, they're like, I don't really do that part. Or if you ask somebody about real analysis, like
Right.
number theory,
Right.
like I don't
Right.
really. You can hit on all the areas, at least a generalist professor sort of thing. All right.
Yeah.
We talked about the /learn command. That's
Mm.
pretty excellent already, and where that's going. So I'm pretty excited about that. Yeah, you
The
also
learn
mentioned.
command actually does
Yeah, go ahead.
have some, yeah, it actually does have a lot of interesting technical tidbits to it. Like
Okay.
the
Yeah, actually, this
implementation
is one
is,
of the really challenging things with these chat API chat bots and things. For example, I've tried to ask ChatGPT if I gave it just one of the transcripts from the show, I want to have a
mhm.
conversation about it. It says, that's too much. I can't do it.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
it's just one one show, and in your documentation, there might be a lot of files in there, right? More than
right.
just one transcript level's worth. So that alone, I think, is kind of interesting, just how to ingest that much data into it.
Yeah, and this is a very interesting subject, and it actually is a bit complex. So
I'm
what
sure it
we're,
is.
yeah,
Tell
I
us
mean, if
about
we have the
it.
time, I think there
Yeah.
are some other features you wanted to discuss. I'm not
That's a,
sure if,
let's dive into this for just a minute because I think it is
yeah,
interesting. How do you make, because this makes it yours, right? It's
yeah,
one thing to ask vague, like, tell me about the Laplace equation and how does it apply to heat transfer? Like,
hmm,
okay, great. I have a specific problem with a specific library and I want to solve it. And you don't seem to understand about enough of it. So it really limits the usefulness if it doesn't,
right.
if it's not a little closer to what you're actually doing. And I think this brings it closer. So yeah, tell us about it.
Yeah, so like, I mean, when you think about it, right, language models aren't just governed by like their intelligence, however you measure that, right? They're also governed by how much context they can take.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons ChatGPT was so remarkable is that it had a great way of managing context through conversation history, and that that like seemingly small like leap and like seemingly small feature like is what made ChatGPT so like remarkably disruptive to this industry, right? Is because of that additional context. And we think about like extending that idea, like how do we give an AI more context, make it
Yeah.
like even more human-like and personal? Well, the idea is similar. We add more context, and that's what learning does, right? And so the way learning works is that we're actually using another set of models called embedding models. And embedding models are very, very underrated in the AI like modeling space, right? These are really remarkable things, and they have this one. I'll only cover like the most important characteristic of embedding models, which is embedding models take syntax and map it to a high dimensional vector space called a semantic space. And inside of this semantic space, nearby vectors indicate semantic similarity. And I know that's like a lot of words, so I'm going to break that idea down, right? So, like canine and dog, let's take these two words as an example, right? These two words are completely different. They don't even share a single character in similarity together, right? They don't have a single letter in common with one another. And yet we know as humans that these two words mean the same thing. They refer to a dog, right? So
Mhm.
like they have different syntax, but the same semantics, right? The same
So their
semantic
vectors would
meaning
be, you know,
would be mapped close.
would be very close by whatever metric you're using. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you extend this idea and like you imagine, okay, what if you split a document? What if you split a file into like 1 to 2 sentence chunks? And then for each of these like let's just say sentences, for example, right? Let's say we split a document into sentences, and then we take each of those sentences and then use an embedding model to compute their embedding, and then store them inside of a vector store, like basically like a local database that just stores all of these vectors in like a file or something, right? Now imagine what happens if we then take a prompt, like a question that we might have, and code that as an embedding, and then we say to the vector store, okay, for this prompt embedding, find me all of the other embeddings are close to this. Well, what you've just done in this process is called semantic search. So it's kind of like syntax search, except instead of searching based off of keywords or tokens or other syntactic traits, you are searching based off the actual natural language meaning of the word. So
Right.
this is much more applicable when it comes to like natural language prompts and natural language like corpuses of data, right? Because this is like the actual information that's being stored. Not we don't care about the characters, we care about the information that they
Sure.
represent, right?
The essence of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And these vectors are computed by the larger language model.
The vectors, the embeddings are computed by an embedding model, and they're actually a separate category of model that we have our own special APIs for.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
in our settings panel, right, you can change the language model, and I think we already discussed that, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what's interesting is that underneath that, you also see a section that says embedding model, and you can change the embedding model to like we also offer that same principle of model agnosticism there.
Nice.
And yeah.
Yeah. This is very interesting. Very interesting.
Mhm.
So let's talk a
So
really bit about the format. You said obviously that you can do LaTeX, which you say math, right? You tell us give me
yeah,
math,
yeah, give me math.
which is yeah, it's pretty interesting. But you can do images, Markdown code, HTML, JSON, text. There's a lot of different
Mhm.
formats you can get the answer back in.
Mhm. Yep. Yeah, so like when you use the AI magics, we can pass them to like a renderer first before we show the output to the user. So
Yeah, and
yeah.
with the AI magic, the percent AI in the cell, you can also specify that's where you put the format potentially, but you can also specify the model and the service, I guess, for the provider.
Yeah, so the IPython magics are basically stateless in the sense that you always have to specify the model explicitly. So they don't operate off the premise that you are using Jupyter Lab. they don't run off the premise that you have Jupyter Lab installed or are using the lab extension that we offer, right? So because of that, like the model is stated explicitly every time, and that's by design.
Hmm.
Hmm.
When you sit down, of like, what is your Jupyter AI provider set to? Like, what's your favorite?
What's my favorite? I don't. I mean, I as a developer, I like literally pick a random one to give the most test coverage at all times, and that's
Hmm.
actually a great way of finding bugs. So yeah, we yeah, I don't have a favorite one. My favorite one is the one that works, and hopefully that should be all of them. So
Yeah, hopefully. Okay,
hmm.
interesting. Yeah, it's, guess you can
I
also
think
tell it to, forget what I was talking about. We're going to start over. That's pretty interesting that you can do that along the way because you maybe had a bunch of conversations and we talked about the benefit of it, like knowing the history of that conversation. But you're like, all right, new idea.
mhm,
Switching topics. Chat.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. I think the last one I wanted to talk about specifically was interpolating prompts. Um,
Mm.
kind of almost like F strings, where you can put a in the prompt text, you can put a variable, and then other parts of your notebook or program can set that value. Yeah,
Yeah.
tell us about this.
Yeah, so like basically, you can define a variable in your IPython kernel, right? So like you, and that's just done, but just like how you define any other variable. But what's interesting is that IPython's actually aware of the variables that you are defining. So we can programmatically access that when we implement the magics, right? So so basically, if you define any variable at the top level scope, like let's say poet equals Walt Whitman, right? So we have a
Mhm.
named variable called poet, and then you can send a prompt over like write a poem in the style of curly braces poet and curly braces, right? And when that is run, the value of that variable is interpolated and substitutes like around the curly braces. So the final prompt becomes write a poem in the style of Walt Whitman. And when that prompt is sent, well, you can imagine it generates a poem of Walt Whitman. And
Yeah.
yeah, the variable interpolation that we offer in IPython is very useful for like very quick like debugging, right? So you can actually reference a cell in the notebook directly. So I'm not, I think a lot of people don't know this, but like in a Jupyter notebook, there's like the in and out like indicators to the left of each cell. So it'll say like
Right.
in dot one, out dot one, right?
Hmm.
So those are actual variables and you can use them here too. So you can reference like debug, tell me why this code is failing, curly braces in dot one. Yeah, and that's you just on the
Yeah.
screen there, just scroll there. Yeah.
Explain what this does. The in bracket 11, or um, yeah, what went wrong in out bracket 11, or yeah, something like
Right.
this.
Hmm.
Okay, it's fine long as you don't go and rerun that cell.
Yeah.
But like you said, this is not for
Yeah, this is
long
for
term.
like
This is
quick.
just
Yeah, this is yeah.
yeah.
And you can make it more you can make it independent of the order of execution just by like assigning whatever variable that is to yeah, whatever like content that is to a named variable. That way
Mhm.
no matter what order you run them in, like yeah,
Exactly.
that
People
goes
might be
goes way
thinking when
better.
you describe this this interpolation thing, just bracket, poem, bracket, curly brace,
Hmm.
poem, curly brace. They're like, we already have that in Python. You just put an F in front of the string and so on. But this is in the message that goes to the AI cell magic, not straight Python, right?
Hmm.
So that's the relevance. That's why this is interesting, right?
Yes. Hmm.
Yeah.
This is yeah, this is going straight there.
Okay. One, I mean, I guess it really comes down to the different models that you select. So you opt into this a little bit, or maybe you need to understand it that way. But talk to us a bit about privacy. If I select something and
Mm.
say, what does this do? What happens?
So I think like, yeah, something important to emphasize here is that whenever you use a language model that's hosted by a third party, right? So like it's running on their servers, right? Regardless of whether this model is free or not. Like the fact that you're sending data to a third party over the internet, like that's where the privacy and security concerns happen, right? And
Yeah.
that happens like whenever like you're sending data across the wire over the internet. But we have some special safeguards in place here, specifically to assuage fears of like concerns over privacy and security that a lot of open source users have, right? And one of the important ideas here is that uh, Jupyter AI is both transparent and traceable. So when we send language to when we send a prompt to a language model, that's always captured in the server logs by default, right? So that's always being logged, that's always being captured, like yeah. So like it's always going to be
There's no
traceable, like
secret back channel. Like you tell
yeah,
them, people, this is happening. Okay.
yeah, so if like an operator needs to audit, like, oh, dang, like, let me check just to make sure nothing scary was sent over to OpenAI. Well, the operator can review the server logs and make sure that all usage is compliant with whatever privacy policy their company has, right? And Jupyter AI is also exclusively user driven, meaning that we will never, by default, send data to a language model, even if you selected one, right? Like we will never send data to that language model until a explicit action is done by the user. So in this case, like clicking the send button, clicking shift enter and running the cell, right?
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
nothing is sent to a language model or embedding model until that happens.
Cool.
And yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. I think that's really all you can do. That's sounds great.
Hmm.
Because you don't control what happens once it hits OpenAI or
Yeah,
Anthropic or whatever, right?
yeah, and that's why the transparency is so important, right? And oh, I forgot to touch on traceability. So like with these AI generated cells, right? So like the
Hmm.
output cells, in the metadata we indicate that which like the model that was used to generate an output cell,
Oh, nice.
if it comes from the Jupyter AI magics. So that way it's also like traceable not just in the logs, but like in the actual files metadata itself as well. So
That's cool because it'd be real easy to say, have the cell magic, and then you know how notebooks store their last output. Like if you upload them to
hmm.
GitHub, they'll keep their last output unless you say clear all cell outputs.
Hmm.
Well, depending on which model you have selected, it you might not get the same output, not even close to the same output. So you might want to know, like, well, how did you get that
Right.
picture? Oh, I had Anthropic
Yes.
selected and not the other, right? Like that is really nice.
Right. And I've actually used the server logs myself to debug like prompt templates, for instance, right? So like because what we show in the logs is the full prompt. Like after applying our template, after applying like the edits, like that's what's actually shown. So
Hmm.
like yeah, so that's really also really helpful for developers who need to
Hmm.
debug what's happening. Mhm.
Yeah, of course. Or if you're a scientist and you're looking for reproducibility, you know,
Mm,
I doubt there's much guaranteed reproducibility even across the versions of the same model, but at least you are in the same ballpark, you know. At least I know
yeah,
what model it came from.
you can set the temperature to 0, but it won't generate very fun output, but that is a workaround if you truly need,
I suppose,
reproducibility.
yeah. The
Yeah.
temperature being the ability to tell it how creative do you want to be or
Yeah,
how focused do you want the answer to be, right?
it's like it's a hyperparameter that basically governs the randomness, like how far away from the mean it's willing to deviate. Like, kind
Yeah.
of yeah, vaguely describable as creativity, yeah.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
suppose. I guess if you're looking for privacy, the GPT for all might be a good option.
Oh, yeah,
If
absolutely.
for that, right?
It's
Because that's not going anywhere.
yeah, however, some of them do have, license restrictions, and that's also why we have also taken it a bit slow when it comes to, like, adding more GPT for all support, is because,
Yeah.
different models are licensed differently, and that's another consideration we have to take in mind, yeah.
Yeah, of course. You're playing in a
Mhm.
crazy space with many different companies evolving licenses. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Let's close it out with one more thing here. Maybe two more things. One is there's a lot of interest in these like agents, and it sounds, for example, your create a notebook that does this sort of thing, like teach me about Matplotlib, is a little bit
Mm.
agent driven. Thinking of like LangChain and stuff like that, or even GPT Engineer. Um,
Yeah,
what's the story? Do you have any integrations with that? Any of those types of things?
we're working on one where basically you won't need to use slash commands anymore. So this is like again, like we're just kind of playing around with this, seeing how well it behaves. But we are trying to use agents to, for example, remove the need to use slash commands. So when you
Yeah.
say like generate a notebook, like it will just generate one. You don't have to know the slash command for that. Like it will
Yeah.
just know.
Okay.
And so like yeah. However, we don't have any. We don't use agents at the present moment now.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that they're not very model agnostic, at least the
Hmm.
ones from our research. Like they only work well for a specific model and a specific prompt template. But
Okay.
beyond that, it's hard. Hmm.
Nice. All right. Last question. Running out of time here.
Yeah.
What's your favorite thing you've done with Jupyter AI? Not like a feature, but what have you made it do to help you that you really
Teach
liked?
Jupyter AI about Jupyter AI. That's an easy one. So we have the
What did it learn?
documentation. Well, learn about itself. So like
Okay.
I was at a conference and so this was at Pi Data and I actually got enough questions to the point where I just downloaded I had the documentation already available in my home directory because of
Like
some other
markdown
previous
or
yeah and
structured
the
text and okay.
markdown source, right? And then I just had slash learn. I just learned that doc, and then I just had that laptop on the side and told people like, if you have any questions, try
Just
answering
ask it.
that. And that, yeah, in case you don't want to wait in line. So, yeah, that was yeah, it's pretty remarkable. Yeah, the learn feature by far is definitely my favorite, and it's the one I want to spend the most time
Mhm.
developing and pushing a bit
I think
further.
there's massive possibility there because to
Absolutely.
deeply understand what you're working on in a multifaceted way. What are the documentations? What is the code? What is the data? What is the
Right.
network topology and servers I can work with? Like all of that kind of stuff, or pick your
That's how we
specialty.
Yep, and that's how we make AI more human. Hmm.
Yeah, right before it takes over. So no problem there.
Oh
I'm
yeah.
just kidding. Just kidding.
Yeah.
All right. Let's wrap it up. I think we're out of time, David. So
Hmm.
final question. Some notable PyPI package, maybe something awesome you discovered to help you write Jupyter AI. Anything you want to give a shout out to?
Ooh. So we definitely use LangChain a lot, and that it's a pretty it has some pretty fantastic integrations, and we're actually built on top of LangChain, really. Um, but also Dask. Dask is really
Hmm.
nice.
Yeah.
Dask has some great visualization capabilities for when you're doing parallel compute. Like it has a great
Yeah.
dashboard that's also
The
available in Jupyter
dashboard
Lab.
that shows it running
Yeah.
and distributing the work in Jupyter Lab is amazing.
And one of the contributors also reached out once he had heard that I was integrating Dask into Jupyter AI. He actually reached out to help us and offer like direct one-on-one guidance with using Dask. And yeah, it's just been a fantastic experience using Dask. Yeah, I have no complaints. It's just pretty awesome that somebody has finally made parallel and distributed compute better in Python.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, Dask is
awesome.
cool. Dask is very cool.
Hmm.
All right. Well, final call to action. People want to get started with Jupyter AI. What do you tell them?
Pip install Jupyter AI. Or Conda. Conda install works too. It's on both.
Awesome. Well, really good work. This is super interesting, and I think a lot of people are going to find value in it. So I could see some nice comments in the audience that from people are excited as well. So thanks for
Thank
being
you
here.
so much. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so
See you
much.
later.